Hello everyone, welcome to my channel. I'm Stacy Ellis. I'm a registered dietitian and my channel is designed to help you improve your life, whether it's nutritionally, physically, spiritually, whatever the case may be. And I'm actually here to talk to you guys about grad school a little bit. I've been in grad school for a while, and I meant to come on here and give you guys an update as I was going through the process. But as you can imagine, grad school actually can be quite a challenge. And so I'm here to talk to you guys just overall about the PhD program. Some of you may be wondering if you should get a PhD, and you may not know what is involved and if it's something that you actually want to do. I know for myself, I looked for information about a PhD program. I did not see anything online. I really didn't know anything about it. And so I went into it kind of blindly. Looking back, there were certain things I wish I knew, so that way I could have made some decisions about my life earlier. So I'm going to talk to you guys about that. So if you are interested in a PhD, stay tuned. I'm going to have even more videos on this coming up. But I'm going to get a drink. I've been talking, so. Okay, so PhD. So maybe you are in a master's program and you're trying to decide whether or not you should get a PhD or not. You hear people talking about it. Maybe you're wondering in terms of if it's going to improve your financial situation in the future. You may be wondering, how hard is the PhD programs? Is it worth your time? All these questions. I completely understand. I did not know the answer to these questions myself. And it took me being in the program to actually learn these things. So I'm going to just give you a background about myself for those of you who are not familiar with who I am and how I even got to the place where I am currently. I'm working on my PhD. I'm a PhD candidate. I'm working on my dissertation right now. And so it's the last step of my program. I will finish my PhD and will defend my dissertation, and then I will be Dr. Ellis here soon. So like I said, I didn't have any idea personally, and I found that actually a lot of people in my program, it was the same. They didn't know anything about the PhD. They just, they decided to do it just like me. So I started off, I went to Sam Houston State University and I got a bachelor's degree in science composite with an emphasis in geology with a minor in secondary education. So I became a science teacher. I taught high school science for a few years, but I decided that it wasn't meant for me really. Like I enjoyed it and I might go back into teaching, but I didn't enjoy it enough, to put it lightly. And I really felt the need for a change. I felt like I needed to be challenged. And so I decided to go back to school. And so I went back to become a dietitian because, I did research and that was something that I was interested in. I loved nutrition and I was like, oh, I can make this into a career. And so I went back to become a dietitian. And that involved me getting a second bachelor's degree, which was only 2 years because I already had my prereqs. I had to do an internship, kind of like with nursing school. You have a nursing, rotations and stuff. So with dietitians, they have a similar thing. And with my dietetic internship, it actually was in conjunction with a master's degree. So automatically, when you were selected into this program, you also were put into the grad program. And so by default, I was working on my master's degree. And so within my program, you have an option. You had an option of doing either coursework or you could do a thesis. And you typically do a thesis if you plan on getting your PhD. So it's just a continuation for your PhD. So even if you did a coursework and you decide to get your PhD later, they will make you do a thesis. Like, it's just, you have to do research to show that you can do a PhD. And so I ended up having an advisor who really made me think, I guess you can say, about who I was. She encouraged me. She was like, "Oh, you can go get a PhD," and I never really thought about it. I remember when I think I was in middle school when they explained all the different degrees to us. And I was thinking to myself, a PhD, 10 years of schooling, that's too long. Like, I wouldn't want to do that. And I know that's a lot of people. They don't want to go to school that long. But when she said that, she has her PhD, she was a professor. She mentioned it to me. And that's the first time I was like, oh, maybe I can do this. I mean, no one in my family had a PhD at the time. No one undertook that. In my immediate family, no one got a master's degree either. The bachelor's was the highest anyone has ever had. And so it just made me start thinking, like, okay, I always thought to myself, to get a PhD, you have to be really smart. And there's some truth in that. You do need some intelligence. It's not just anyone can get it. There's some people that they just won't be able to. It's just the truth. But I remember thinking to myself, wow, maybe I can do this. And so that's when I started thinking about it. I remember talking to my husband about it, and he was like, whatever you want, babe, and whatnot. So I decided to do the thesis option, and I did the thesis, and then I applied to the PhD program. But let me remind you, no one in my family got a PhD. I now have an aunt that has a PhD, but I have never had anyone close to me that went through this process. So I had no idea what to expect. And so going in, I had my first semester of classes, and I remember, so my PhD is in nutrition, minor in kinesiology, which, mind you, most people with PhDs, they don't get a minor, so I'm already a little unique in that avenue. But I remember going to my first class. I got accepted into the PhD program literally the week that class started. Like, they already had their first class, and then I got my letter, and so I had to register real fast and get caught up in the class. And I remember my first class. It was a doctoral level class. It was micronutrition, and it was different than undergrad. We had articles that we had every single class. And we had to analyze the articles. We were to discuss the articles in the class, and it was very challenging. So are the classes the same? Some of them are similar to undergrad, and some of them are similar to the master's program, where you are given a lecture and you have tests, or you might have papers or projects. Some of them are like that, but then some of them are a little bit different, where they require you to think a little bit more. And this was one of those classes. And so like I said, we had the journal articles that we had to look at before we come to class, and then the students had to explain what was going on in these different articles. And so it was very challenging. And then we had, so it's micronutrient. Micronutrient it's pretty much about vitamins and minerals. And our tests involved us to memorize things. We had to remember different pathways. And in undergrad, we had to do that a little, like glycolysis and stuff like that. But now we had different pathways we had to memorize. And so that class was challenging. And then I had another class that was just as challenging, macronutrition. And in this class was a lecture format, but it was different. We didn't have articles that we necessarily discussed. She went through the material, but we also had a lot of reading in this class. So in undergrad and in my master's program, you might have like a chapter or two per class that you had to read. In this particular class, every week we had like 8 chapters we had to read. And if I was honest with you, I did not read 8 chapters every week. It was impossible. And she knew it was impossible. The professor knew it was impossible. And a lot of the chapters had a lot of the similar stuff. We had different textbooks covering the same things, but it might have a few extra things here and there. But that was challenging. That class was challenging because you had so much to read. And then it was the same type of thing. Her tests, you had to memorize pathways, and you really had to know the stuff. So in terms of the level of difficulty, the PhD program is a step up from the master's in terms of the difficulty and the amount of knowledge you're needed to know. But I will say this, it's not impossible, right? Like, you built yourself up to this point. So you actually get to a point where it's like, okay, I can do this. I can memorize these things. Now I will be honest with you. I did cry a few times because there comes points where it's like it's impossible to just get through everything. But you find that you're prepared enough for the test. If you really work hard and you try to get through the material, even if you don't get through all the chapters, but you go through the material, you have your lecture notes, you have at least, for me, I would read at least one of the books, right? I would go through or at least skim it, look at the diagrams. And that helped me. Okay. They know that it's impossible to read that much. Some people can do it though. Some people can read all 8. There were some people that could, but I couldn't. And I still got an A in both of those classes. Okay. So that was only a few of the classes. The majority of the classes that I had were like master level classes. And so, if you have a master's degree and you take in classes, you find that the master level classes are kind of like the undergrad classes. It's just that you might go into a little bit more detail about a certain topic. So undergrad is more broad, where graduate, you start to narrow in on a topic. And so that's what I found with the classes. So it wasn't necessarily that bad. There was just a few classes that were really, really difficult. But you typically will know what classes those are in advance, so you can space out those classes. So that way you have like one really difficult class, and then you have like the classes that won't be as hard. Now there are some programs where you go through a cohort. And what that means is when you start the program, you're starting the program with a bunch of other students at the same time, and you stay in the same classes throughout your program. So there's a series of classes you take your first semester, second semester, and so on. So you stay in your cohort throughout your program. My department was smaller, and so people came in every semester, so we didn't have cohorts, even though there's people that you'll have classes with over and over again because you're taking the same classes. It wasn't a cohort. Okay, so there are differences depending on the program that you're in. Okay, so typically with a PhD program, you have classes that you have to take. For my school, they counted a lot of the classes for my master's degree. if you were to get a degree that's similar to your master's degree, that can be the case. So I had a nutrition master's degree. I'm working on a nutrition PhD. So a lot of those classes actually would count for some of my credits for my PhD. Now, if I were to have switched, then I would have had to get different classes and I would have been in school a lot longer. So that's something you might want to consider if you're thinking about getting a PhD. Different programs have different criteria in terms of how many credit hours you need. My program is 90 credit hours, but there's other schools and other programs that might be shorter or even longer. So you want to look at the program and see what they require, okay? So typically what will happen, some people, they come in and they know exactly what they're going to do their research on. And so they might start instantly doing their research, working in the lab. This is if you're doing a science-based project. There's different types of PhDs, so not everyone's science-based. I can only talk about science-based because that's what I know. But I know that there's other PhD programs where like maybe it's more like a fine arts, where you have to do some research in your writing and you have to publish papers and things like that. But for science-based, typically you start working under an advisor and you start doing research. But that's not always the case. So for me, my research interest is dance nutrition. No one is really interested in that. Like, there's hardly any professors. I'm sure there's one somewhere in the world, but at my school, there's none, right? There's some exercise nutrition professors, but in terms of dance nutrition, there's no one doing research on that. So I was pretty much on my own in terms of research. So I spent my first few years looking at literature, doing a literature review, reading articles, starting my dissertation lit review part. So I didn't work in the lab. I didn't work underneath a faculty member. But that is something that's typical. Like typically you would be under an advisor, under a faculty member, and you'll be in their lab working on their research. But like I said, that's not always the case. So for me, if you're doing something that is not in conjunction with an advisor, you still have an advisor, but if you're not doing their research, but you're doing your own research, you will have to just go through the normal process. I apologize if you can hear there's a siren going on. So typically what will happen, you'll do your research on your own, right? And you will prepare yourself to present what you plan to do for your dissertation, okay? So before you even can present that, you have to complete all of your courses, your academic courses. They might allow you a few here and there, but you have to complete their required courses. So my program, we had a core curricula that you had to finish, and then we had a thing called a qualifiers exam that you would take. And the qualifiers exam is just to see if you qualify to be a PhD candidate. So every program's different in terms of what that exam may look like. Within my department, we had to write a research grant, submit it, and then we had to do an oral exam regarding our grant. Now, since I've had my qualifiers exam, they've made changes. So now, instead of doing that, they have an actual exam that the students have to answer questions on. And they have a day to do that or whatnot. So it does change depending on the school you're at and even within the same school. Within kinesiology, they have an exam and they do statistics. They ask them a lot of statistical questions, even though it's kinesiology. So it is different. So you do want to do research on the program to see what their qualifiers exam is like. Now, typically they have a PhD handbook available within each department. So, the qualifier exam will vary depending on, what your degree is in. So, in PT school, they might not have a qualifiers exam like the way we have it, right? So it is different. Okay. All right, so after the qualifiers exam, you then can start working on, legitly working on your dissertation. Now, technically, you probably already started working on it. Like I said, most people, they already start. But to legitly work, you will start working on it after your qualifiers exam. And so the first step is to formulate what your study will be. And so we call this the prospectus. So the prospectus, you have a short lit review, and then you come up with your methods of how you're going to do your study. So for our program, this was a 10-page document. Okay, you have your lit review, you justify why this research is needed, and then you come up with your actual research plan of what you're going to do. And then you will submit this to a committee. This committee is the committee that's going to grade you. They're going to let you know whether you can do this research. They will also be the people who will tell you whether or not you pass at the very end of your PhD program. You get to pick your committee. They do have to meet certain criteria. So like for me, being that I have a minor in kinesiology, I had to have someone from the kines department on my committee. You want to also pick people that's going to help you because, if you have questions, this whole process is to help you learn. And so you want people on your committee that you can go to ask questions, to help you feel comfortable. So you will send them your prospectus and you will end up presenting it to them. And it is at this point that they're going to ask you questions and give you criteria for it. For me, they actually made recommendations for me to make some changes to my study. And so based off of that, I went back and I had to make changes before I had to start my study. After you've gotten your prospectus approved, depending upon the type of study you have, you may have to submit an IRB. An IRB is an application involving research that is on humans. So because humans are humans, you got to protect them. You don't want to do anything that can be detrimental to their well-being. We have to submit our study to an IRB board, which will be used to see if there's any ethical problems within the study. Once that gets approved, then you can actually start working on your research. And so at this point in time, you can start collecting your data and, recruiting participants if that's needed. If you're not working with human participants, after you get the approval and the okay from your committee, you can start right away with that. Once you get all of your data, you can then analyze it, finish writing your dissertation, and then the very last step will be you presenting your dissertation to your committee and answering their questions. This is what we call your defense. If you pass your defense, you're now a doctor. If you do not pass it, they may ask you to make some more changes to your dissertation. You may have to go back and do more research. You may have to, make some modifications to your writing. Now, this is the general basis of a PhD program. You have classes, you have an exam, then you have your research where you get tested throughout your exam. Now, some programs require additional things. So in my program, they do require us to submit 2 journal articles before we graduate. You want to check again with the department that you will be working with to see if they have certain criteria that you have to do. They may require you to do some teaching hours. They may require you, to work in a lab a certain amount. So it does vary from program to program of the requirements. But in general speaking, this is what the PhD program is. It is considered to be a very long program, unfortunately. It takes longer to get a PhD than it does for you to get an MD. It's longer to get a PhD than it does to get you pretty much any of the professional degrees. It is a very rigorous degree. Not to say that it is harder than an MD. Some people find MDs and all those other degrees to be harder. It depends on the person, right? So the PhD is more like a marathon, while something like an MD is more like a sprint, right? And you're required to memorize a lot of things real fast. So who's the PhD program for? It's for people who are interested in, for one thing, research. If you feel that you might be doing research in the future, then a PhD would be a great option for you. You can work at a university as a professor where you can do research, or you can just be a professor and you teach. But a lot of people are actually going into industry now where they work with a particular company and they do research. Now, you may not be interested in doing research. Quite frankly, I'm not quite sure if that's what I want to do or not. I'm open to it, but I know for sure that I like educating people about nutrition. So I know for myself, I'm definitely going to be writing books. I'm definitely going to do public speaking. And so for me, having a PhD adds to my credibility. So sometimes people get a PhD just to add to their credentials. Currently, dietitians are moving to where they need a master's degree. And so since the master's degree is going to be the standard, I know for me to have a PhD, that puts me one step above. It helps me become a leader within the field. And so that's part of the reason why I decided to get a PhD for myself. Okay. But maybe you're not interested in any of that. You really do want to have a clear understanding of why you're doing the PhD. If you don't, it's really hard to stick with it. I've seen more people drop from the PhD program than I have seen people drop from the master's program. It is rigorous. You will have things that come up that requires you to endure. It's the truth. It's not that the PhD program is that much harder than the master's program, but it does require you to have a level of endurance. You have to be strong. You have to be your own motivator. Because the truth of the matter is, the only people who really, truly understands what it's like to get a PhD is the people who are getting a PhD. Your family members are not going to understand. Your spouse is not going to understand. No one really is going to understand but your fellow PhD students and the ones that have already gotten their PhD. And so you have to be someone that's motivated. You have to be someone that is willing to push yourself when you get tired, when you want to quit, because you will have times where you do want to quit. And so you have to be a type of person that can withstand that and say that you can keep going. So who's the PhD for? Is it for everyone? Definitely not. Is it worth it? Definitely yes. I know for myself, I remember when I went through my master's degree, I saw how much I developed as a person. You learn different skills outside of just the classroom knowledge. And now that I am getting close to the end of my PhD, I see that I've developed skills and become a person that looks different from when I first started my program. And I don't see any other way that I would have gotten to this point without getting my PhD. But that's something that you have to desire and want. I went into this knowing that I was going to develop as a person, because I remember how I developed with my master's program. And I was like, well, if this happened with my master's, I can only imagine what will happen going through my PhD program. And so if you want to get challenged, if you want to get pressed, if you want to get stretched and turned into someone that you never thought you could be, then the PhD program's for you. If not, it's okay. You do not need a PhD to be successful. Matter of fact, a PhD does not guarantee that you're going to make a lot of money. A PhD does not guarantee employment, but it can for some people. So with that, this is just the beginning of the series. I do plan on doing more on the PhD program, getting in a little bit more detail on the different steps, and also about my journey, how I got to this point. I know, like I said, I was looking online for information on PhDs, and there wasn't that much out there. And so I hope to help other people who were like me, that were trying to figure this thing out. If you have any questions regarding the PhD process and any suggestions for future videos, please comment below. And if you are someone who is currently going through a PhD program, and you have any words of encouragement for our inspiring individuals who are thinking about being in a PhD program, leave those comments below as well. Thank you for tuning in, and I'll see you guys on the next one. Bye.